What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel or wherever you are watching this content at. Shout out to those of you listening to the iHeart Radio app, as well as those of us listening on Fan First Sports Network. But regardless, for all of you, we got a very special interview today. With me today, special guest Dr. Rami Hashish, and to give the proper introduction for this well accomplished man, Dr. Rami is the founder of the National Biomechanics Institute. He also has been an expert witness on more than 1,000 occasions examining injuries in sports, the workplace, motor vehicle, and aviation accidents. He's been consulted by various organizations and agencies, including the U.S. Air Force, the National Brain Injury Association, as well as teams and agents affiliated with the NBA and NFL. And today, we're going to get to the bottom of what is the real truth with the injury status of Joel Embiid. So, Dr. Rami, appreciate you for taking some time. How you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing can't complain too much, I guess I would say. We got I guess I'm seeing the way the Dallas Mavericks are falling apart is making me feel a little bit better from a Philadelphia 76ers perspective, but nonetheless, never want to see any of these guys hurt and all those kind of things. So we spoke 3 years ago about the status of Joel Embiid's knee. He had recently picked up a meniscus tear at that point, and boy, have things taken a turn since that. So my first question that I wanted to launch at you to kind of dive into this is take Joel Embiid out of this, the name as a whole. If I was to tell you right now that we have an athlete with the laundry list of injuries that we are seeing in front of him, with him specifically with three meniscus tears to this point, he's had two broken feet, has broken his face three separate times, a torn ligament in the thumb. What would your honest assessment of what's going on with that athlete? Is there an issue directly? I guess a better way to phrase this is: do you think it's fair to say that some players are more injury prone than others?
I think certainly there are players that are more injury prone, but with regards to specifically the injury list in which you gave, a lot of them are separate.
Uh huh.
So, a face injury doesn't necessarily affect, something in the thumb, which doesn't affect the knee, right? So there are people that are more injury prone, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those particular injuries suggest to any given pattern necessarily.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and that's been, to be honest, one of my personal frustrations as a guy who will defend Joel Embiid and stick up. It does feel like this guy has the worst luck in the planet, just as far as getting hit in the face and random things here. But nonetheless, it has hit, I would say, an all-time low as far as the injury outlook for him. That we haven't really gotten a full feeling or really even injury description for what specifically is going on. Now, granted, this all stems from the meniscus tear that did occur last season. Embiid did get, and I want to go. I guess the next question I'll dive into here when speaking about specifically the meniscus recovery, there's a couple different routes that you go about it, right? The different variations of surgery. Could you kind of go through what those options are and what dictates like the direction you take for going down those paths?
Yeah, generally speaking, I mean, there's two principal routes. There's a conservative route, which may consist of physical therapy and rehabilitation, but they also may do some regenerative medicine, such as stem cells and things like that. And then there's also the surgical route. And it really just depends on person's biological makeup, how they're recovering to certain conservative measures. I mean, generally speaking, however, whenever an injury occurs, the appropriate approach to it is to take a conservative route. And obviously, if the conservative route doesn't work, then they kind of start considering more surgical routes. But there's also the regenerative route as well. That's sprinkled in there with the conservative approach.
Interesting. And with the surgical approach, there's kind of two variations of that, if I understand correctly, too. There's the full meniscus repair, as well as meniscectomy. Is that the right word for the other one?
Right, correct.
So kind of take me through what the full difference in those are. And if I'm correct in this, sometimes they cannot like understand the full, I guess, what is the best direction until they physically get in the knee and look at the inside there. Is that correct there?
That is correct. Yes. Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. So yeah, meniscectomy is a removal of part or all of the meniscus. So yes, that is correct though.
Perfect. And so that is just kind of wiping away sort of the ligament and all that kind of stuff there. The full meniscus recovery, how does that differ from the timeline and the exact procedure there?
So it doesn't remove any of the ligament, just to be just to be clear.
Okay.
So meniscus is basically a portion of cartilage. So within every single knee joint, there's basically two circles slash semicircles, pieces of cartilage that basically are aimed to serve as cushions within the knee joint. So basically between the shin bone and the thigh bone, there's two pieces of cartilage. Those are what's referred to as meniscus. Those are not those are not ligaments. Those are just types of cartilage, and that's essentially what he's been having trouble with. And the issue is obviously if there's removal of portions of that meniscus, then it becomes closer to a bone on bone situation. So then the pain increases, but also the cushioning generally within the joint reduces. And then when that happens and you have bone sitting on bone, then not only is there pain, but there actually can be breakdown of the bone as well.
Yeah, and it does feel like that is the specific situation that Joel is dealing with this year. And one of the things that I think is noteworthy here is like he did seemingly, and it makes it very difficult to gauge this entire situation. Part of the biggest frustration has been the lack of transparency from both Joel Embiid and the Sixers for what specifically is going on. Even as recently as last year with the meniscus surgery that he very clearly got and needed at the time, nothing broader than the word procedure that he had undergone on his knee was kind of released to the public here. But for the season as a whole, there hasn't been any official injury diagnosis really all season. It's been knee injury management, it's been knee swelling, knee soreness. Does that tell to you that that's specifically what's going on? That it is just kind of, I don't want to say just pain tolerance, but sort of it's the issue of working through things currently, correct?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
that's the issue. And the thing is that
Sure.
it's even hard to kind of discuss his injury because we don't really know what his injury is, right? They've been a little bit coy about what's actually going on, and I personally don't have any sort of firsthand knowledge with regards to his injury, so I can't. It's a little bit difficult to discuss it, frankly, because we don't necessarily know exactly what injuries and what's actually underlying there. There may be a whole litany of other problems that are going on that we're not even familiar with, or at least that we're not privy to. So
Right.
it's a little bit challenging.
Yeah, yeah, it has made it impossible to connect from start to finish, and we did get the official news that Joel Embiid will be shut down for the remainder of the season as they sort of pursue some sort of long-term, I guess, solutions in this. Now, we've heard a million different reports from what theoretically could happen, whether it's Joel Embiid going to Germany to get some stem cell procedure, whether it is a procedure, whatever the case may be. What sort of are the options when you get to this stage of the meniscus that you can recover? I know there was a lot theorized with this Lonzo Ball meniscus replacement surgery. That feels pretty experimental as well. So I guess based on the information we have, what sort of options could potentially be out there for Joel Embiid?
Not many. So obviously there's surgery, there's replacements of the meniscus, and there's regenerative medicine, and I discussed earlier a little bit, which is kind of more the stem cell route and PRP injections and things of that nature, and then also the conservative route. I mean, those are really it. I mean, there's it's not that we have all of these various options. I think what's going on though here is that I don't think necessarily that Joel Embiid and the team around him necessarily have the best um, ability to motivate him.
Okay.
I don't. I want to be a little bit politically correct when I say things. I don't. I obviously don't know him personally. So, but what is clear is that there are clearly some weight issues that are present, and I think there's some probably strength issues. And from what I understand and from what I read, there's some issues in motivating him. So I think it's important to kind of take a step back and kind of understand kind of the big picture of an injury. So as people age, there's degeneration. So there's breakdown of our cartilage, there's breakdown of um, different things within our body. And it would be foolish to say that there are players in the NBA right now that don't have degeneration in their knees. I'm sure that LeBron has degeneration in his knees. I mean, he's older, he's had more wear and tear, right? Kevin Durant, whoever it may be, all of these older players naturally have this degeneration in their knees. Obviously, the difference with Joel Embiid is that he's obviously a little bit heavier and what have you, but the concept of degeneration in the knees and the breakdown of the cartilage is normal. There's age-related factors with that. So the point is what we have to do is that we have to somewhat optimize our bodies in order to withstand the pounding, right? And that goes for both weekend warriors as well as players in the NBA, is that they have to optimize their strength, they have to optimize their flexibility, they have to optimize their mobility in order to reduce the effect of the poundings of playing in the NBA, right?
Mhm.
And what is clear is that Joel Embiid is not doing that. That to me is somewhat apparently obvious because we see his body as is, he could certainly stand to get in better shape. Same with Zion, same with a lot of these players. These players can stand to get into better shape, to optimize the strength, to optimize the mobility, to reduce and mitigate the effects of playing in the NBA, right? I think that's kind of probably the route in which they should be taking.
Okay.
Um, and I'm certain that his athletic trainers and the team around him has certainly encouraged him to do so, but it's clearly not something that's sticking.
Okay, so if you were facing Joel Embiid, given medical advice now and kind of giving it your plan A or number one, the first thing to prioritize, you would say, is lowering his weight, getting into the peak shape possible, and that should be the biggest step towards limiting the wear and tear.
Yes, you have to get in shape, right?
Sure,
That's it.
sure.
I mean, get in better shape, right? That's
Okay,
it. I mean, there's obviously people may have some sort of comfort level with being in certain at a certain weight or playing at a certain weight, but right now it's about what is the optimal weight, what is the optimal uh kind of like let's optimize your mobility, let's optimize your strength, and let's get into the optimal weight so that we mitigate the effects of playing 82 games a year, right? He's at the point where I think he's only played more than 65 or 66 games once or twice in his entire career, right? So
right.
there's clearly something wrong. So that formula has to change.
Interesting, and I think, like, one of the, I guess, difficult juggling acts that Joel has faced is, like, this sort of balance between him picking up an injury and then being sidelined for a couple months or an extended period of time, and then, obviously, like, that kind of is a takes away from some of the fitness type of thing. So, what are some of the ways that he could directly go about, like, balancing that better? Obviously, when you're hurt, you're not gonna be playing basketball at a high level or sprinting at a high level or that kind of thing, but what are those steps behind the scenes that he probably should be doing a better job at?
Spending more time and money on his body. Obviously, I don't necessarily know how much he's spending, but from my viewpoint, it's not enough. Um, Versa climber is an effective way in
Okay,
burning calories. You have to do a lot of proactive rehabilitation. So even if you're not even injured, there has to be this proactive approach to rehabilitation in your body. Strength training, ensuring that your quads and your hamstrings are in kind of ideal working balance, working on mobility, working on strength, working on flexibility. These things are just, this should be a way of life at this point, right? And as time goes on and there's further degeneration within the body, he has to take a much more proactive approach in order to address it.
gotcha, and that's certainly something that, I guess we all could wish, like, that things clicked a little sooner in Joel's head, and that's certainly of even more, like, legitimized and clear examples of this at the early parts of his career with him ballooning up in weight in periods of time like that, but the bottom line is they're at the situation where they're at, so we can only fix things from here. By my eyes this season, it was pretty evident that, like, he did not have the same mobility and burst coming off that knee as the season progressed, and we saw them finally make the decision to shut him down. Do you believe that is stuff that it has more to do with kind of just directly how he's feeling, maybe a lack of trust in that knee? That's something he's been open about as well. So I guess when sort of like divvying this up here, how much of that do you think is mental as far as not having the belief in the knee, and how much of it is physical as far as like the lack of fitness? And is this stuff that just fixes itself as he kind of plays through it, or is there more to it than that?
No, it doesn't necessarily fix itself as it plays through it. In fact, it may actually get worse as if he plays through it and there's some sort of issue structurally or degeneratively within the knee that's not being addressed through optimizing the muscle balance. So no, and how much of do I think of it's physical versus mental? I think it is physical.
Okay.
I think there's a physical issue that's obviously driving him to have less confidence in his knee, and then it kind of perpetuates it. But what is actually the initiating cause of this is a physical one. There's a physical issue, and that physical issue naturally he will become less confident in his knee, less confident in his capability. And the biggest issue commonly when we have some sort of physical ailment or impairment is that we start now compensating with other parts of our body. And then
Right.
that exposes us to having an increased risk in different parts or regions of our body, right? So then that now can play with you mentally as well, right? But what is actually the driving factor behind this? I view it to be a physical one.
Okay. I can't decide, to be honest, at this point, what is a positive there and what isn't to look at. Like, obviously he's dealing with something and working through it, but it has been really hard from start to finish with put the finger on, I guess, like the root of the issue and how to solve it from here. Now, I this idea from basically the early parts of our conversation here doesn't sound like it's something that would make sense from Joel, but something that's brought up a lot is this Lonzo Ball meniscus transplant or replacement surgery that he had done. Could you talk about like exactly what that entailed? And with Lonzo specifically, I like pointing this out. Missed 2 full seasons. He's younger than Joel. He's lighter, shorter than Joel. Basically, checks every box for having a little bit higher chance of bouncing back. But what is that type of surgery, and what does that entail?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he had a full meniscus replacement, and I don't necessarily think that that works for some people and it doesn't work for others.
Right.
And oftentimes, people can't necessarily get back to their peak physical health. And I think with Joel Embiid, that may be a little bit jumping the gun because we don't even know what the extent of the issue is and the extent of what he has done to address it. So I think it would be a little bit kind of preemptive to actually discuss kind of a full replacement of his meniscus at this point. I would obviously defer that to, the medical personnel that are evaluating him. But generally speaking, if we kind of just look at it from more broadly, people who are a little bit larger, heavier and set, as you indicated, have a much lower likelihood of a successful recovery. That's just the fact of the case, right? So,
Mhm.
to put him necessarily through that, I don't necessarily know if we'll be talking about the same Joel Embiid, the MVP, and all of those things. And I'm sure that that's on the forefront of their mind, that they want to get him back to as close to, if not the identical player that he was before, right? So going down the path of Lonzo Ball, I don't know if that will necessarily be the case. I mean, even if we look at Lonzo Ball now, incredible recovery, but he also has on a pretty extreme time restriction,
Right.
and he's, I don't know, 100 pounds less heavy than Joel Embiid, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that all makes sense to me there. So, like, do you think there's any chance that Joel Embiid could return to the MVP version of himself, or do you think this is something we should start talking about? Change the game, change the style, and just kind of maximize whatever there is to maximize.
Yeah, I think he could be back to
Okay.
being an MVP player for sure. I think, but it really comes down to, obviously, the health of that knee, but also I think a lot of it comes down to him as well. And I don't, if we look at Zion, and I'm kind of lumping them in together, is because there's a similar issue here and a similar pattern where it deals with weight and the time in which these individuals take in perfecting their body, right? So, unfortunately, not everybody dealt with the same hand. Some can get by, some can't, right? Joel Embiid is in a position where he needs to perfect his body in order to play at a high level. He will not be able to skate by being a little bit heavier or having improper muscle balance and all those types of things. He literally needs to perfect his body. And yeah, do I believe if he does that, can he get back to being an MVP caliber player? Of course, right? Uh, as I mentioned before, degeneration and these types of things are expected and they're natural. And obviously, they're progressed if you have higher weight or different factors. But that doesn't mean that it can't be addressed. You can have severe degeneration in your femur or your thigh bone, and you can have severe breakdown of the cartilage within your meniscus. But if you work on the strength and flexibility of your knee joint, and you really work on rehabbing your knee joint, the muscle and the flexibility can overcome a lot of those internal issues, right?
Hmm.
And we see this regularly with high level athletes. High level athletes regularly have this breakdown of cartilage. Let's just look at NFL players and NFL running backs. They have breakdown of their cartilage and their meniscus where after their playing career, they can't even they can't even walk. But during their career, they overcome a lot of this through really improving and maximizing the strength of their quads and their hamstrings and their glutes, and optimizing kind of the flexibility to kind of overcome the degeneration that's actually internal.
Interesting. Yeah, that's all very interesting stuff. I got two more questions for you here. This one I want you to half take off the medical hat, half put on the business hat a little bit here. So when you think about flashback to this past offseason, one of the decisions that has been given a lot of heat to Daryl Morey directly here, is giving Joel Embiid an extension, a 3-year, $192 million extension that was agreed upon this past offseason. Now, he's played 19 games this season, and in those 19 games has failed to look any semblance of the MVP version of himself. He was under contract for this season. He was under contract for next season and had a player option. Now, the Sixers have been quite public about that they had a team of doctors look at him and didn't even believe that this could have been a worst case scenario for what he was dealing with. If you were in Daryl Morey's shoes at this time, do you think this would be the type of extension that would have been a bit too risky for your blood, or do you think this is something that it was the proper decision at the time, and obviously the worst case scenario has come to light?
No, it was risky then. It's risky now. It should have never been provided to him. I mean, obviously, his past certainly suggested that he's worth that, but it was very clear that this was a poor decision. I believe it was maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago in which I was even telling colleagues of mine that this player won't be able to hold up in this kind of space, right? He
Wow.
doesn't have the profile of a player that can withstand for 15 years or withstand for 10 years, right? Obviously, he's incredibly talented and incredibly gifted, but his body was not one that would be suggested that somebody can hold on for this long period of time. So yes, when Daryl Morey provided him that extension, it seemed a little bit crazy, at least from kind of a more medical perspective.
Yeah, it certainly has aged that way as the worst case scenario has come to light here. Now, the last question that I did want to have for you is I do feel like a lot of times the way these athletes are talking about or are spoken about publicly and all these things, we do lose a little bit of the human element of things that I do think is important to remind people. So, when speaking about Joel Embiid specifically, and we know there's been 3 meniscus tears, the laundry list of injuries I've already listed. What does life post basketball look like for this guy? Because he's going to be 31 this season. The wear and tear is there, not getting any better. Is this guy that you think is going to be looking at long-term issues stemming from these knees, or what else do you think?
I think that it can certainly lead that way. And if personally, if I were in Joel Embiid's life, that's what I would be focused on, actually
Right.
more than basketball personally, is the idea is take your time in your rehab, make sure that your rehab is complete, ensure that eh, have proper weight, proper nutrition, and really focus on life after basketball. And if you're going to focus on life after basketball right now while you're also trying to prepare to be an MVP again, is that really focus and be diligent on your rehab, because the worst case scenario is that you come back too early, you get injured again, and you then have to have another surgery, and now your life after basketball becomes worse and worse and worse and worse. So they kind of go hand in hand, right?
Right.
If we really want him to focus on being an MVP again, it kind of also goes hand in hand with, hey, let's also focus on your life after basketball, which is take your rehab as seriously as possible, right? Because the
Mhm.
worst thing is have another injury and then this kind of linger on down the line. But as we sit here now, will it affect his life after basketball? The answer is yes. Unfortunately, that's one of the negatives, obviously, of playing professional sports, is that you're exposing your body to harm,
Right.
and you have degenerative conditions that you're still putting kind of wear and tear on in order to kind of maximize this short window of your ability to play basketball, right? So will this lead down the line to pain with walking or potentially knee replacements down the line? It certainly could. It
Wow.
certainly could, and it's quite common, unfortunately. So yes, I think it's also on us as fans to actually consider that human element. That if this was our brother or friend or uncle, what would we advise them? Not just kind of, you know, just perform for us and kind of. I mean, that's obviously a very inhumane thing to look at. So as a fan, I want to see him get better, but also if I was in his life, the fo- the what I would advise him would be the same: is take as much time as needed in rehab to make sure that you come back to as close to 100% as possible, because that's your highest chance of being successful both right now in basketball but also in life following basketball.
Yeah, you nailed that there, and that's been something that has crossed my mind more with this specific injury situation than really ever before with Joel and with all athletes there. So, will be very interesting to see how this ultimately concludes. It would be nice if we get a little more clarity from the Sixers organization for what specifically he is dealing with the information there. But I do think it's going to be a pretty telling offseason for the Sixers and for Joel Embiid specifically and how they deal with this. But Dr. Rami, I really appreciate you taking the time. One more thing before we sign off here. What else you got going on? Where can people find you? Got plenty of good stuff. I was scrolling through the website earlier, but plug all your stuff.
You can go to National BI, so National Biomechanics Institute or nationalbi.com to check out what we're doing. We're doing quite a bit, consulting in sports and forensics and a whole bunch of stuff. And you can even set up a call with myself or some colleagues if you need some injury advice as well on that side as well.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll make sure to link that below. You guys make sure you're checking that out as well. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you are listening at, if that is on PickSwap Media, on Fan First Sports Network, or on iHeartRadio. So appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this today. We'll be back talking with you next time. Hopefully some better news in the Sixers world. But for now, keep it rocking and talk soon.